Hi, everyone. I'm Adam LeWinter with Tag Cyber, and I'm joined today by Alan Saldich, Chief Marketing Officer of Corelight. Hi, Alan.
Hey Adam, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about network detection and response and how Corelight is really leading the charge in that space. So why don't you give us a little bit of background on Corelight, Alan?
Great, thank you. Corelight is a company in the NDR space that's been around about 6 or 7 years. The first few years were really as a service provider, helping people implement Zeek, the open source network detection framework. And then about 4 years ago, the company pivoted and decided to introduce a product, which is now a line of hardware, software, and virtual appliances to help our customers monitor what's going on their networks. And to boil it all down, we tell our prospects, we provide security teams with the world's best network evidence so they can close investigations more quickly, even when they go back years and years, which I think, as we all know at this point, is more and more common as attackers, become more sophisticated. They're lying in wait and being more crafty and harder to detect, more evasive. So it's really important to have the evidence, to be gathering the evidence that will allow corporations, governments to go back in time and understand what happened. Whether it's something that happened this morning or a year ago or more than that.
Yeah, and I think that you really rely on that relationship and knowledge that you have with the Zeek community and being active contributors to that. Is that still a good heart of what you guys are, or at the heart of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, it definitely is. So we're I think a pretty classic open core software company. We sell to large enterprises, governments, and universities primarily. A solution built on really two open source packages at this point. One is Zeek, which I think has had a new name for several years now, but for a long time was known as Bro. So people watching this might know it more as Bro. But in I think the fall of 2018, the open source project changed its name to Zeek. And then the other one is Suricata, which is also widely used, really signature based detection framework. And the two open source tools have been used for years together in parallel, and Corelight has incorporated both of them into our appliances and done a lot of work to integrate the two of them because they're different. They're complementary. They're both very, very useful. You could use one or the other, but really things are a lot better if you use them both together. And then we build solutions around those open source frameworks and add a lot of capabilities that are not available if you try to kind of do it yourself.
Yes, let's talk about that for a minute, because I think a lot of the people that would potentially watch this are familiar with this open source tooling or other open source projects and would think, why would I want to engage an enterprise vendor to help me with this? And I know that you guys offer a lot of great features and functionality, and there are some real use cases that you help customers solve that they just can't accomplish on their own with the open source packages. Can you explain a little bit about what those use cases are and how customers are taking advantage of Corelight?
Yeah, I think with any open source project that an enterprise is going to use, and of course there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. So this is not a new concept, and what I'm going to say is not necessarily specific to Corelight. It's just a fact of life. Open source software is free. We often say it's free like a puppy. There's a lot of costs that come with open source software. The great thing is, if you have the time and the expertise and the patience and the people to throw at an open source project, it can be very powerful. And it's also just a very powerful way to develop software. So, in the world of proprietary software development, typically you have a corporation that invented something or developed something, and the customers are then dependent on that company's employees, the engineers there, to build that solution and to maintain it and improve it over time. And then you're also, if you're a customer, if you become a customer of that vendor, and the thing that you bought, it becomes important to your operations, well, then you're kind of stuck. You really become beholden to the vendor, and sometimes that's fine, no problem. But sometimes vendors are known to take advantage of their customers with dramatic price increases or stagnating development or whatever. And the customers really don't have much leverage. So one of the great things about open source from the customer's point of view is, of course, you're getting the benefit of the brains of people, not just at the vendor who you might be buying a commercial solution from, but really the entire open source community. So that's certainly true with Zeek and Suricata. And then the other thing is you have leverage, right? Corelight's customers, if they don't like what we're doing, if we're not providing good service, if they don't feel like they're getting value, they are completely free to stop paying us and continue to use Zeek and or Suricata independently as open source projects, and that's fine. Now they'll give up some functionalities and features that we built around the project. That's just the way it is. But I think more importantly, your question is really what do you get when you go with a open core commercial solution like Corelight versus doing it yourself? And I think a lot of our customers who've done that, who've gone through that journey, they begin it's usually one person or a couple of people who download the open source software, fool around with it for a few months, get familiar with it, and then they say, hey, I think we could use this. So maybe they build a sensor, they get a off-the-shelf server, they load the software, and they start using it. Hey, this is fantastic, this is great. Let's put this in 10 locations. Well, then you start, okay, well, how do I manage 10 sensors? How do I get the data into my SIM? Whether that's Splunk or Elastic or Devo or Chronicle or whatever. There's some issues there. Well, I'm starting to run into packet loss problems. So now I got to spend days and weeks debugging, trying to fix packet loss. Maybe the NIC card that you picked, it can't handle some of the things that you want to do, or maybe the operating system that you're running Zeek on, turns out you made a bad choice and you got to go back and switch to a different one. And the real hassle here is, as it becomes a bigger scale implementation, you just end up spending more time trying to make the whole system work. And there are just performance challenges with making Zeek run at high speed that turn out to be quite challenging. And usually it takes enterprise security teams, months to some. We've had one customer in particular that spent 2 years building their open source Zeek infrastructure before they finally said, you know what, this just isn't worth our time and effort. It'll be better if we go to a commercial a vendor, in that case, Corelight. And then the other aspect of it is, in this particular market, the individual humans who are building the open source systems are usually the incident responders and threat hunters themselves. So, those people are really hard to find and hire and train and retain. And I guess part of our pitch is, look, let's say you have a team of 5 incident responders. Do you want them spending a significant fraction of their day being sysadmins, basically, for open source tooling? Or do you want them spending their time responding to incidents quickly and resolving them, doing threat hunting as well, et cetera? So I think there's a lot of costs that come with trying to build open source stuff yourself. Now, some companies culturally, that's their strategy, that's their philosophy. Particularly Bay Area, large scale, web scale companies that you can think of. They just have a culture of building everything from hardware to software in using open source. But out in the kind of more mainstream enterprise world, it's not so easy to find the people and the experts you need to really make that work. And then especially if somebody leaves, if your Zeek expert leaves and they're the one who built the infrastructure and nobody else really understands much about it, that can be a sudden, pretty serious vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of the people who are embracing the open source side of the house do so at a smaller scale, and it's usually for those smaller environments. But when you start to look at the challenges of scale to an enterprise level, and the maintenance requirements that go to that, or just the deployment across a wide variety of a distributed architecture across an enterprise network these days, I think organizations are really challenged with that limited visibility that a tool like Corelight or by extension the open source of Zeek really provide. And with your open NDR platform, you give that level of safety around the enterprise functionality that would be expected to help offset some of that risk of maintenance issues or team members leaving, as you mentioned, and things like that. So can you talk to me a little bit about more of how you are expanding or continuing to extend this open NDR platform that you have to support these very distributed environments that are out there, from hybrid cloud to fully public cloud to multi-cloud solutions? I know you guys are doing a lot to address that network visibility issue that most teams are challenged with today.
Yeah, I think maybe I can just frame it a little bit. Our basic story, and I think it's very common, these days. Endpoint detection over the last 5 years, or maybe a little bit more than that, had become kind of the default. Certainly not the only solution. Most of our customers have dozens or scores of security tools and systems deployed. But just broadly speaking, network detection, used to be called more frequently network security monitoring, or intrusion detection, or network intrusion detection. There are a lot of acronyms. That was 15, 20 years ago. People were doing that. This is not a new idea. But then the pendulum really swung to endpoint detection. These companies, were founded in the last decade, and people realized, wow, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of information, a lot of evidence in endpoints that would be very useful for security investigations and monitoring. So that became very fashionable. And network detection, network monitoring, kind of, I don't know, it's a little bit old news maybe. I think what people have discovered with the proliferation of devices, and bring your own devices, and cloud and SaaS and everything else, and just the zillions of devices that we all have and that we all use in our work and in our personal lives, and then you layer on top of that, IoT and other endpoint things that are not really monitorable from you can't deploy your endpoint solution on every single thing with a chip in it in your global enterprise. It's just not feasible. So the pendulum has kind of come back to, and people say, wow, in addition to endpoint monitoring, we also need network monitoring. And the acronyms du jour are really EDR and NDR, and they're quite complementary. And so what we tell our prospects is you really need to have both. Monitoring what's going on in your network is absolutely fundamental. It's kind of the ground truth. If you're not monitoring that, you only get really one chance to collect data or collect evidence about a particular time period. And if you weren't collecting it when whatever happened, and you don't find out about it till a month later or 6 months later or a year later, you can't go back and reconstruct that incident, right? You just, it's like you didn't see the crime happen. Well, you didn't see it happen. You may never know. So that's kind of the framework that we talk about: EDR, NDR, and then all of that data ends up somewhere. Now, where it ends up, we're quite indifferent. Our customers typically are putting it in some kind of a SIM, as I mentioned before, like Splunk or Elastic or Chronicle or whatever. But they could have their own homegrown analytic stack built in Hadoop or Databricks, or doesn't really matter. The point is that you need to collect the evidence, you need to collect the logs, and Zeek just happens to be a very powerful kind of purpose-built way to extract, very rich, very detailed and structured metadata about network traffic. And the key thing for people to understand is that if you're collecting that data and it's accessible to your security teams, usually people can resolve 80 to 90% of security incidents just with that data. Now, there are times when you have to go to endpoint data. There are times when you're going to want to packet capture a PCAP and look at the actual, complete transaction to figure out what really happened. But you can't keep PCAP files around for months or years. It's just not practical at a large scale. So that's just not a viable alternative. But it's just a critical piece of evidence, network detection and response solutions. And I think what distinguishes Corelight and open NDR in general from NDR, there's really three things that make something open NDR. First of all, it's built on open source technologies, which we've discussed a little bit. And then there are other products out there that are not, that have proprietary metadata extraction techniques. the power of using Zeek is it's been around for 25 years. It's battle tested, battle hardened. It's been used, by the largest, most attacked, most sensitive networks in the world. But there I'm talking about government networks. So there's no doubt that Zeek is the kind of gold standard for network metadata extraction. So open source is one thing. The second thing is open access to the data, the underlying data. So when you're a large enterprise, with a real security operations center and very sophisticated adversaries who are persistent and highly motivated for whatever reason, whether it's a nation state or a competitor or just a troublemaker, who knows. You need access to the data when some kind of an alert happens or someone notices something weird or a system fails or whatever. It's not enough to get an alert or some AI-driven insight that says, here's the problem, turn that thing off and whatever. There's a lot of subtlety there. Enterprise networks are really complicated. The data that's flowing on them is at massive, massive scale. Network links in the gigabits per second, many and many of them, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of users, thousands of applications, lots of data types. And so it's not so easy for any system to figure out, what's good and what's bad. And so one of the philosophical differences about Zeek is it doesn't try to figure that out. Zeek is not about deciding this is a bad person, that's a good person, this is a bad application, that's a good application. It's really about this is just what happened. And you, the human or the AI-assisted human, or the SOAR application or all of the above, need to figure out what happened, but we're going to give you all of the evidence. And that evidence is exposed. You can pull on those threads, you can dig around in it, you can search it, query it, group it, sort it, drill down as needed until you're satisfied that you understand, what happened, when did it start, who's been affected, is it benign, is it malicious? So you need that open access to the data. That's the number two. And number three is an open platform, which means that you can modify and extend the platform as you see fit. And one of the great things about open source projects, as I said earlier, is there are a lot of people contributing to them around the world. And so in the case of Zeek, you can add packages to your Zeek sensors, whether they're open source or Corelight. At Corelight, we provide a lot of pre-configured packages, some of which are from the open source community, some of which are developed by Corelight engineers. And you can even write your own packages. So a lot of Zeek users, if they become, expert in Zeek and they use it for a while and they realize, our needs are different than the general Zeek community. We need to write a package that does X or that looks for behavior of this type, or maybe I need to extract a specific data element out of network traffic that most people don't care about, but for whatever reason I care about it. So I'm going to write a script to do that. And so that's another, you're not just stuck waiting for the next release from your vendor and hope that the roadmap includes the things that you want. You can do it yourself. So those are the three things: open source, open data, and an open platform that make OpenNDR what it is.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that a lot of people, as you said, with this switch or this pendulum swinging towards the endpoint space, and now it's coming back towards network, they look out at their network and they get a little intimidated sometimes, because the perimeter, as everyone has been saying for the last few years, is gone. Right? You have cloud providers or hybrid situations. It's hard you can't just simply go to a switch and tap on that or do a span port across that switch and get your information. So right. Having these packages and having these deployment options for people just to get the data, just to get the raw visibility that they need to be able to do the other analytics work that they're going to do is key. And doing that across these wide environments, I would imagine your customers take great advantage of these, this knowledge that you as a company of Corelight have built up around this, the Zeek sensors, but also what you've developed in-house.
Yeah, no, that's right. And you asked earlier, I didn't really answer it. We do have products that monitor, data centers. So typically our physical appliances are deployed, on-premise, obviously. But we also have the same functionality in cloud sensors for the three major cloud platforms. We also have virtual sensors for VM deployments. And then we have a product called the software sensor, which is really an application that can be deployed on any Linux, any Linux box, even a Raspberry Pi. We have a program where we let prospects download our software, the software sensor, and in the pandemic, it's been very useful as a way for people to get comfortable with and familiar with Zeek and Suricata and the Corelight solution at their own home network. And I think oftentimes it's pretty eye-opening what they see on their home network. We've had stories about people seeing their refrigerators sending data, or there was a blog post about a Tesla owner who, was pretty blown away by how much data their car was sending overnight back to Tesla. And you can see it all, when you're monitoring the network traffic. I think there are, whether our customers are trying to trying to monitor their data center infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, or anything else, there's ways to do it. And then we aggregate all that data back into some analytics platform.
Yeah, so where are you really seeing, I guess, the biggest adoption of the Corelight platform, this open NDR platform with your customers? Are there specific use cases or verticals that are, heavy adopters of this, or really, that you see a lot of traction with, or is it more widespread?
So we sell, just by the nature of our the data that we produce, to our customers, cybersecurity is really, it's a big data problem. That's kind of how they think about it. So we sell mostly to very large global enterprises, government agencies in the US and abroad, and big research universities. And the reason that those are our customers is that in general, those are the kinds of organizations that are more likely to be kind of a data-first organization, meaning they're not looking for, and they're not satisfied with a fancy dashboard with lights and maps, and I mean that can be useful and kind of distilling. Yeah, but when you're operating a company with hundreds of remote sites in 50 countries and 90,000 employees or whatever, or you're a government agency with hundreds of thousands of employees or even millions, operating globally, that's just not enough. So, and then you also have to have the kinds of customers that want our data. They have to want it. In other words, and that sounds circular, I guess. But what I mean by that is you have to want the logs, you have to want the alerts, you have to want to keep it for long periods of time, which means you have to have kind of a modern SIM infrastructure. You have to have kind of a culture of data and data exploration and big data. And if you don't have that, if you have kind of an older generation SIM and you don't have much of a SOC team and you don't really know what to do with a lot of data and how to explore it, then there are probably better solutions for you. That's probably not a Corelight kind of shop. So that's kind of who we sell to. As far as verticals, I'd say there isn't a dominant vertical. Technology, kind of the usual suspects. Technology firms, broadly speaking, financial services firms. We have quite a few retail customers of various types. We do have some smaller customers that have very high value content, I'd say, or a very there's a lot of risk in their business. So hedge funds, some law firms, where they're not big in the sense of a Fortune 500 kind of shop, but they have either a lot of data and or very sensitive data that if there was a breach, it could be really very serious. And I think when we talk about the value of Corelight and the value of Zeek, the value depends a lot on who we're talking to. So if we're talking to a CISO or a CEO of a large company, they're really concerned with what I might call major breach management. The worst case scenario, avoiding that. Now, typically they're not going to know the ins and outs of Zeek, but in order to manage breaches more effectively, they are very interested in how do we speed up? Everybody knows there's an overwhelming number of incidents and alerts and everything else, how do we speed up investigations and do them more completely and more effectively? Well, that requires, how do you do more incidents per person per day? How do you deal with this deluge of data? And the way you do that, in our opinion, is you give your teams more complete context about what's happened. You don't give them incomplete, kind of partially completed puzzles. And well, here's a few clues about NetFlow data, and here's a PCAP that it only goes to last Thursday, and before that we have no idea. And here's some device health logs from some of your routers, but not others. Or here's the DNS. We capture DNS queries, but not the responses. Or wow, we thought we were collecting DNS queries, but somebody turned it off 18 months ago because DNS system was too slow or whatever. So there's all these things in the reality of security teams that make it very hard for them to figure out what has happened quickly and accurately, and that slows everything down. That increases the risk, increases the probability that something will slip through the cracks unobserved, and that just increases the risk that someday something really quite serious would happen, which nobody wants. So I think it, when you're talking to security buyers, we have to pay a lot of attention to whom we're talking with and what they care about, and kind of get in at the right level and explain it at the right level. And starting with the features of Zeek is not always the right place to start. Sometimes you got to start at the top and then work your way down and try to explain the value in that way.
Yeah, makes total sense. And it's one of those situations where you don't realize you're missing the data until you desperately need it, in that response, effort or, incident response effort that you're going through. So, I've always said it that, network is the source of truth, and you have to be reliably capturing that across the entire environment that you're responsible for monitoring. And it seems like with the ability to deploy Corelight sensors throughout an entire environment, as we've mentioned multiple times here, hybrid environments, cloud environments, data centers, you really do get that complete visibility that security analysts are really going to rely upon when rubber, meets the road.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, it was a terrible event, but a great case study on the value of something like Corelight was the Sunburst, SolarWinds attack, where, we would never claim that we would have stopped that or anything. It was a very obviously clever and determined and long-range attack that was very successful. But the customers, the organizations that had Corelight or even Zeek deployed, 2 years ago, were in much, much better place to figure out, whether that attack had been, whether they'd been a victim of that attack, to what degree, or even the converse, to prove that they hadn't been. That can be just as important, right? So if you've been collecting the logs for years, it's a very trivial, once the IOCs were known, once those were published, then it was just a matter of going back and searching the logs and to see whether any of those were visible, any clues were visible on your network over the prior 12 or 15 months or whatever it was. If you hadn't been collecting that, as you read in many articles, people were saying, we're going to have to burn down our network. We're going to have to basically, rebuild it from scratch because we really don't know. We have no way to know whether that attack had been successful. It's just one of these things. I think the security industry kind of maybe got bored a little bit of network monitoring for a while. It was like old news. Oh yeah, we did that. We've been monitoring our network since 2002 or whatever. But what they mean by that really is we're using the tools that we had back then, which in those days your typical corporation wasn't likely to be a victim of a nation state attack in the early 2000s. I mean, maybe it happened here and there, but obviously today things are very different. The landscape is different. And so, back in those days, the only people using Zeek really were government agencies for the most part, because they were facing nation state attacks back then. And they did need tools that weren't perimeter based. And just the nature of the beast back then was quite different. And I think what's basically happened is the enterprise market, the conditions that enterprises are facing have kind of grown into the capability of something like Zeek, that they didn't need Zeek 10, 15 years ago. But today things are quite different, and they do need that visibility. They need the metadata, and they need to keep it around for quite a long time.
So, one of the things that I think a lot of customers struggle with today is the increased amount of encrypted traffic going through their network. So how does Corelight address the concerns around the lack of visibility that traditionally comes or is designed into the encryptions that are being used to protect that traffic?
Yeah, that's a super important topic. Even just 5 years ago, inside of an enterprise, a lot of the traffic was unencrypted. And I think if you ask any security analyst, would you rather look for try to resolve a breach looking at encrypted traffic or unencrypted traffic? 100% of the time they would say, of course, I want to look at the unencrypted traffic. And while it's certainly true there are a lot of products out there to decrypt and re-encrypt traffic so that you can look at it in its unencrypted state, that's not always possible. Sometimes there are legal constraints on doing that. Sometimes there are policy constraints. Sometimes it's just operational. Just in your organization, it's not feasible to break and inspect at that place where you really want to do it. So the fact is, there's more and more encrypted traffic within organizations. You can't always see the raw traffic in the clear. So then, what do? Well, you can either just there's nothing I can do. I hope there's nothing bad in there. But one of the nice things that we've been working on the last couple of years at Corelight is our co-founder Vern Paxson, who's the creator of Zeek, 25 years ago. He's built up Corelight Labs research team, which has developed a lot of techniques to gain insight into even encrypted traffic. So we're not decrypting it. We're not claiming to be able to see perfectly, but there are a lot of things in the timing of packets and the inferences that one can make about encrypted network traffic that might indicate malfeasance or might indicate malicious behavior or at least unusual behavior. And so we have packaged that up into something we call the Encrypted Traffic Collection, which is a collection of packages or scripts that come with our appliances and just give security teams an added, I wouldn't call it X-ray vision because that would be overstating the case, but we've used the analogy before of a Christmas morning where you come down as a kid and there's a bunch of presents if you're lucky, and what do you do? Well, you can't open them yet because mom and dad are still asleep, but you start shaking, you start and you can kind of tell if you have siblings, are there 3 identical boxes? Is the box heavy or light? Is it, if you shake it, does it make noise, or is it like underwear and socks? You can make inferences about that. It's kind of a trivial analogy, but it's kind of accurate. There are things you can tell about network traffic by looking at it, even when it's encrypted, that give security teams clues about where to focus their analysis and where to dig deeper, where to pull on threads. And so that's very exciting. We have other things coming in the near future that are going to do provide similar levels of insight, around command and control behavior, which is another critical area, where again, you may not be able to have perfect visibility and perfect detection, but there are a lot of things you can do. We'll probably be announcing this in, kind of the May timeframe, that give teams clues and speeds up their investigations and really helps them know where to focus. So that's, again, the power of the extensibility of Zeek. It isn't just the out-of-the-box open source project, and that's all you get. It can be extended and has been extended over the years by Corelight, but also by other vendors, even end users of Zeek, which makes the platform more and more powerful over time. And it really is kind of a durable. We sometimes talk about it as it's a durable approach to cybersecurity. It's not a technology that plugs this hole in the dike and then plugs that hole and then plugs that hole and then there's another hole. It's a sustainable, durable platform that you can build on and be collecting this data and then adding more and more capability over time. So I think that's really the power of the platform.
So if someone listening to this is interested in getting started with Corelight, how would they go about doing that?
Well, the best thing to do is probably just go to Corelight.com, and we have a lot of content on there about the technology, about Zeek, about Suricata, about our products, of course. You can also go to our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Corelight. We have a lot of webinars. We do a ton of webinars about all kinds of topics on Zeek, on Corelight, on threat hunting, on Sigma rules, on all kinds of things. So I'd say those are probably the two best places to start.
Well, great. Well, Alan Saldich, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today, and look forward to how Corelight continues to push the conversation when it comes to network detection and response.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Thanks for your time today.
All right.